and get your golden thumb. Woo. And here's the camera taking your, streaming your. Actually, I don't know if it's this one or that one. And I don't think you were here earlier when we told about the golden thumb is a tradition at Ebertfest. It's a casting of Roger's thumb made by the same people who make the Academy Awards.
Wow.
So anyway, the golden thumb. Oh. And Roger, unfortunately, was not feeling that great, so he had to go back to the apartment. But he said to tell you, this thumb is well deserved.
All right. Thank you, Sue. Oh, I'll take that.
Oh. And we have Ignatiy Vishnevetsky as the moderator and Arikan as your panelists.
All right. Thank you so much.
You should sit in the center.
I sit in the center.
Do you want to sit in the middle, or how are we going to do this?
Yeah, sure.
Between
Let's do it. Yeah.
thronged on both sides by moderators. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming out. This is the third time I've seen this film, and I love it even more every time. I'd like to kind of begin by asking you about I guess the gestation of this project, how this came together.
Well, it starts with a wonderful novel written by Robert Kaplow. You know, the name of the movie. Just read it. Holly and Vince Palma, who I worked with, screenwriters, friends of mine in Austin, colleagues for a long time. We've worked together. And, I optioned the book thinking this is the hardest film. Like, it's tough to get a film made these days, much less a period film and it wasn't like a $3 million low budget thing that you maybe can get made these days. So I thought, oh, this will never come off, but sometimes you just try. And sure enough, we got the script and started looking around for, I thought I wasn't even gonna look for financing or try to make this movie unless I found Orson Welles. Why even do it? Yeah, so I was the goal was to have a script, a budget, schedule, and Orson, and then say, let's go, see if that can get made. And sure enough, I, talked about all the usual actors and who can play Orson Welles? I mean, it's a kind of a losing proposition, I think, for any actor. But I remember theorizing, I think Orson, kind of exhausted all the American actors. You go to a lot of theater, you see people, you talk to people, and nothing really happening. And I thought, well, just theorizing, who our Orson is? He's probably there's some British actor doing Shakespeare right as we speak in London, And sure enough, 6 weeks later, I get a call from Robert, the novelist, Kaplow, and said, hey, there's this little show up here in New York. There's this British actor doing a one-man show in a little theater, 50-seat theater, for 10 performances. And it had won an award in Edinburgh or something. And the name of the show was Rosebud, The Lives of Orson Welles. And I'm like, wow, okay. So I kind of looked at it online. I said, well, that guy, he looks kind of what the hell is this? So I flew to New York and saw that show. And it's a one-man show, kind of starting more or less with War of the Worlds. And then he plays Welles, particularly as an older man. He has fake noses and he's really big. And it's a wonderful, wonderful show. But I talked to Christian after the show and flew him to Austin. I mean, I just kind of took this as a sign, from the film gods. You have to. And so flew to Austin where I lived, and we did an old-fashioned screen test. Period clothing, and we filmed a couple scenes. I cast some local actors, and I just checked him out for a weekend, see if he'd be a kind of guy to work with. He had never done a movie, but he was new to acting, actually. He had been recruited for that show. He didn't really know much about Orson Welles, but because he had a resemblance, he was recruited by a producer and one of his co-writers on that one-man show. And so Christian is just one of the more amazing guys I've ever met in my life. He's a world-class concert pianist. He was one of those child prodigies. Then he but at 19, he was touring the world with symphonies, playing Rachmaninoff concerto. I mean, he's that good. And somewhere along the line, he just kind of got the acting bug and went to the Royal Academy of, Dramatic Arts, and, there in, in England, and just started acting, and was an unemployed actor, more or less. He had been in some, what does he say? He makes a joke. He'd been playing a eunuch in some Shakespeare play, some small part, but he wasn't really, he was in the Royal Shakespeare Company, but he wasn't really like the big star of anything. So, but he's just an incredible guy. I mean, I can't imagine the film, without him. So, I don't know.
I completely echo Ignatiy's, fanboyish love of this film as well. But for the last scene, I'd like to talk about the actors, especially Eddie Marsan as well at one point, but because he actually looks and sounds exactly like John Housewood. It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit later. But the first thing that, when you watch the film, but for the last scene in the museum, it almost feels like a daydream, because you've got the film bookended by the classroom scenes, and at the first scene, obviously, is kind of ambivalent towards Shakespeare, and at the end, hello, okay, sorry. I can project like this too.
Nail your words to the back wall.
That's right,
Yeah.
nail your words to the back wall. So maybe you could talk about that particular daydream aspect of the coming of age story.
Yeah, I just wanted to feel like this whirlwind week, like, did that really happen? Young Richard's on this, but I'm not a theater guy, but I would imagine you talk to all actors and you can just, we all did theater in school at some point, but the pressure leading up to that opening, that just seemed like such a nice little time frame to base a movie around, that, the rest of your world just dissolves and you're so committed. I mean, it's like that with movies, but it's just not the same. Where does a movie, you have your first day of production, that's something to build up to, and then, there's so many places along the way, but there's no one moment like opening night. There is when the film premieres, but you're just sitting in the theater. You're not doing anything, the film's over. So you never get that incredible rush that a live performer would have. And so I just thought that trying to capture that energy and that commitment, kind of the mania that would go on in a theater company. And Mercury Theater was pretty notorious. The people, I read everyone's memoirs, talked to a few of the survivors that are still with us from the production. And yeah, they do speak of Welles and Houseman just yelling at each other, just fighting. You could hear it down the street. And they're both kind of performers, right? So, it was kind of a big theatrical experience to be anywhere near Welles, I think at all times. That's what it sounds like. He was just it's very important to him that he be entertaining to you at all times. Those little magic tricks, and that was part of his charm, but maybe didn't help him in his long-term career. Like he'd rather have a 4-hour dinner with someone and be brilliant than just make him. I don't know. I don't want to.
Well,
I'm not going to psychoanalyze.
Well, I wanted to ask about, speaking of theater, of the theater itself, because it's a space that kind of you get to know really well over the course of the film, the Mercury Theater, the movie. And I was wondering whether it's a constructed set or an actual theater, and how close it is to the real Mercury.
There's only a few surviving photos of the Mercury Theater. We were well into pre-production when we found an exterior photo of it, because the Mercury Theater was gone by the early 40s. I think it was torn down by about 41. If you go to West 41st Street now, right by Bryant Park, it's in that block right by Bryant Park. It's just an office building. You would never know in a million years. That place looks so different. We put a plaque up there, though. Really? Yeah. Did you know anyone can put a plaque up? If the building owners agree to it. It's no big historical thing. We just said, on this site,
I've got a few plaques to put up.
Yeah, but at least in New York. But we got lucky. It kind of was a combination thing. The Isle of Man has a big film company over there, and they were interested in producing the film, and they have on the island one old, big, beautiful theater that the one interior photo we have of the Mercury Theater it had, you know, it looked very similar, the same amount of boxes, and it was a little, they had restored theirs really beautifully, so we kind of aged what they had, and it had, the stage was about the same size, and it had that understage area where it's like an old, built around the same time, turn of the century, late 19th century, all those wooden cranks and everything, because they still use all that. Gorgeous. So we were actually in, so to answer your question, it's a real old theater that is so old, you know, in its 120th year of operation and on an island that it's these same people, these actors have been performing in forever. So you can really feel it. There's a spirit in that space. And so that just became our Mercury Theater. We rehearsed there for a long time, and we shot, and we all lived in a hotel like almost adjoining, and it just became our lives. We sort of became the Mercury Theater, all of us. You know?
Yeah, well, because there's actually, there are one or two shots I remember in the film that it looked like one of them is shot from a catwalk, I think, looking down, and it's the sort of, it almost seems like the sort of shot that would only come to someone while wandering around a theater, instead of kind of planning ahead of time. So I was wondering how far, you know, the working in the theater went into the rehearsal.
Spent a lot of time in there. You know, that we shot, I think half our schedule, we shot the whole thing in about 36 days, and half of it exactly was in the theater. So the rest we shot in, this is a complete British production, by the way. We shot not a frame in New York City. We took some photos and then, you know, digitally created some skylines and stuff. But
Well, maybe then we can, you know, go back to my original question about the acting, about the actors, and how did you cast the movie? Because Ben Chaplin's obviously great in it, and I said Eddie Marsan. I think for me, after Christian McCarthy, he steals the show because.
yeah, well, he's such a great actor. Eddie Marsan is, you all know him more recently. I mean, Happy Go Lucky is a great performance by him, but he's given a career's worth, and he's a wonderful guy. I was really thrilled that he would even, you know, come in for it. But British actors, they're kind of different than American actors in the way that, like Ben Chaplin, Kelly Riley, who plays Portia, she's a huge star over there. She wins Olivier Awards. I'd seen her in this incredible production of Othello while we were in, just as I went over there and we were casting, I met her and then saw her 2 nights later in this production of Othello at the Donmore Warehouse. That was incredible. That Chiwetel Ejiofor had just killed it. I mean, she's wonderful. And so she comes in and plays a little part. But American actors are like, you know, I don't want to be in a Zac Efron movie. You know, that's not going to help my career.
Well, maybe you could talk about Zac Efron as well.
Whereas the British actors are like, hey, it's about theater. I spend most of my life in the theater. And they all do movies, theater, BBC productions. They're not really, they float. They're just looking for a good part. So I kind of like the work ethic and and they all had theater experience too, of course. So they brought so much of themselves, you know, their experiences, and you know, everyone has stories, but Zac Efron does too. He started acting very young, and he had toured and had a lot of theatrical experience. He said this part was by far the closest thing he'd ever played to who he, you know, really is.
Right. What about Claire Danes? I mean, the 2 major Americans, obviously, Claire Danes and Zac Efron.
Claire, that's well, you know, she's been in the theater too. Not a whole lot, but you know, a little bit. And she grew up in New York, so. But she enjoyed that because she's unlike. She's the only one in there who's not playing an actor. She's someone who has kind of a disdain for acting. You know, mincing around on stage. She's kind of dismissive of it. She's much more ambitious. You know, she's going to be the boss someday, which I think she liked that portrayal. You know, and it's 1937, a pretty ambitious young woman. She's a real modern woman of that time. And it was fun for her. But I've been a big fan of hers for so long. We joked because she auditioned and from 92, I was auditioning for Dazed and Confused, and she came in. She was about 13. She was a little too young for the part, but we both remembered it so well. I said, yeah, I think you were like the best actress I met. You were too young for the part, but you were I thought it's so fun doing this because you meet so many people, and then you see like a year later she was on My So-Called Life. You just saw her career go, and I go, yep, I saw it. You know, that one audition, you know, but so you meet so many actors you want to work with, and you just hope you know, your paths cross and the right role comes along, and you know, you get to work with someone. So I feel very blessed to not only have met a lot of new people, but all these actors I've admired for a long time, like Eddie and, you know, Ben Chaplin, people think Ben is kind of a serious, leading man. But when you meet him, my casting director I was working with in London, she would say, "Oh, you got to meet Ben. He's really hilarious guy." I go, "Really? I haven't seen him in enough things that he seemed that funny." And I met him, and oh, great. He really got Coloris, who was funny. Coloris's wife came to a screening we had in London. And I kind of apologized. I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't that bad." She goes, "Oh, yeah, he was a real pain." She was like, he was terrible. And Mike Lee saw this movie and told me, like, "Oh, my very first film, I cast George Coloris," because he lived a long time. Yeah. And, he played Thatcher in Citizen Kane. He was the... Yeah. And Mike Lee said, "Yeah, he quit. He didn't like the way I was rehearsing. He quit the film." So Mike Lee's first film, Coloris, quit. Yeah.
Well, funny you should mention Mike Lee, because obviously Criterion just recently brought out Topsy Turvy, a fantastic film.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Absolutely. And did you talk to Mike Lee about your film, and whether did you?
Not really. I mean, he just saw this at Toronto or something. We talked after, but he liked it. And we shared the same director of photography, Dick Pope. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he came over and talked to me and said how much he liked it. And he walked off. We talked for a while. He walked away, and Dick Pope comes up to me. "Rick, that's very good. Mike hates everything." That's really good. Yeah. He said, "That's good."
There's a line in Topsy Turvy. W.S. Gilbert says there's something inherently depressing about success. You just said that you don't want to psychoanalyze Welles, but that's kind of the flip side of it. That's the Mikado comes at the end of their careers, whereas this is 1937. The guy is, what, 25, 22? 22. And at the beginning of his career, and interestingly enough, after this, after Kane, it was never the same for him. And did you have that sort of, and did you work with Christian Mackay based on that?
The best thing about doing this set in November of '37, even though we all, we obviously know Welles' work, and Christian, because he had been in that show, he really, in the short amount of time, he knows more about Welles than I'd have to say anyone I've ever met. He read every book. He really internalized the guy. And it was great to not have to even discuss anything that happened after that moment. Just to be right at that moment was really, it was great. It was kind of freeing. And when you think about someone like Welles, his career is so vast and complicated that no one film, it would be a complete waste of time to do like a biopic of Welles. You couldn't do it. So this was like, if enough of us over the years do one little, and it's starting to happen. There's been other moments and, with varying results, but, the only way I think you could ever depict Welles would be this kind of amalgam of films and plays. And there's a play that originated in Chicago, Orson's Shadow by Austin Pendleton. I don't know if it's a wonderful play that I saw, and it's Welles in around the early 60s. He's in London doing The Rhinoceros with Olivier, and he had teamed up there. Just kind of another little moment in his life. He's trying to get his film career's kind of in the toilet, as everyone knows, and I don't know, he's struggling, but it's kind of a wonderful, another little moment in his life. So.
Much of the later part of or a very large chunk of the later part of the film is taken up with the performance of Caesar. And so I was wondering how much information survives about the original performance, how much had to be kind of made up.
That was the single most fun element to this, and the biggest challenge doing it, obviously, was to recreate the play. And, I had actually directed Julius Caesar in 6th grade at age 12. And the only thing I have in common with Welles. But a very different interpretation, I'll have to say.
All the parts were played by children.
All that survives from this play, and that's why theater's so ephemeral. That's what's kind of so poetically beautiful about it, is there was no moving images, no recorded. Even Welles, who was very interested in cinema and knew that was his future, no one thought to throw down a couple cameras and film it, 2-3 camera shoot, no. But there was a series of photographs, and the entire movie is based on a famous photograph of the guy who Zach's character is based on, who played Lucius, sitting on those steps playing a lute. Robert Kaplow saw, there's Welles, and then he's playing that lute, and he's like, who's that kid? What was his life like? What must have that been like? He imagined that, and he actually looked up in the New York phone book. That actor's name is Arthur Anderson, and he was still alive. He's in his 80s. He's still alive. I talked to him on the phone. Oh. He's one of two surviving. Norman Lloyd, who played Sin of the Poet, is still with us. He's like 96, lives in LA, had a long career, still acting. Still playing tennis 3 times a week.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere. And he saw the movie, and Christian became good friends with him. But to talk about restaging the play, we were just based on a series of photographs and everyone's memoirs. They all talk about the red wall in the back. What this film, like everything Welles did, is a total magic trick. It shows, it's kind of like the lowest budget film you can imagine. He did it with nothing. And what it references in the movie, like Tallulah Bankhead. Yeah, she had her famous, Antony and Cleopatra, that had been a huge bomb, a huge, extravagant, overproduced thing that had just tanked the night before. He'd done it that way. I had a scene in the movie where he's actually praying for that film, for that show to do poorly, so theirs will look better in comparison. But we cut that. It was good. There had been that production, and he said, just think of it. They didn't have any money. It was a bare stage. All he had was lighting, and he used everything in such an ingenious way.
And no gels, I believe, right? That's what I remember reading about his production, was that he didn't use any gels.
Yeah, and there were these famous moments you read about where the assassination, I didn't have any photos of this, but the series of floodlights that flooded the audience. So it was fun just seeing that and imagining it. And the theory goes that Greg Toland, his brilliant cameraman who worked with him on Citizen Kane, came to that production of Caesar. And when he heard Welles was going to Hollywood, arranged to have a meeting with him and said, hey, I saw your Caesar. I want to work with you. I like what you were doing, with the lighting. Because that Welles was the master of the mood and the lighting and the effect. He really knew how to get an audience. Just that was innately such a part of his, thinking. Very cinematic, on stage. He drew your eye there. So, the hardest thing, and was really, the actors would ask me, is this a good production? Like most movies about theater, it's kind of easy to say, it's bad theater. We can all laugh. Bad performances, it's like kind of funny. There's a lot of movies about that. And I would go, well, actually, because a lot of the British actors, they didn't know much about this particular production. But I said, well, it goes down in history as maybe the most influential Shakespeare production in North American history. So actually, you're pretty good. Houseman and Welles wouldn't have cast you. In fact, the character you're playing, you're acting, an actor, is probably better than you. So there's the bar. And then it's on me, too. We got to make it seem like a production that earns its standing ovation at the end. So that was our challenge, But it's exciting to read the original reviews, because I got all that stuff and just how thrilled. It did stun people. You have to go back. The idea of doing Shakespeare in modern dress, which is pretty common now. You can do Shakespeare every which way.
Exactly.
Totally original idea. Not completely original. Someone had done some smaller time version, but Welles, whether he heard about that or originated it, this was completely new and political, obviously. They all talk about how the Caesar in this particular play looked a lot like Mussolini. So we went with that. The actor even shaved his head.
Well, the thing, obviously, about the two things about the production is the lighting was based on Albert Speer's Cathedral of Lights. And if you look at it, very much like Triumph of the Will. And
we called those lights, the up lights, we called them the Nurembergs.
Oh, right. Okay, well, there we go.
That was our joke. Like,
this is
the Nurembergs on.
Exactly. And that was, and there was one very famous moment, which you don't have in your film, but when the cast, pointed guns at pointed machine guns at the. Yeah, like Tommy guns at them. But at the time, obviously, it worked for them. But maybe in the film, it might not have.
We couldn't find any Tommy.
All right.
I don't know. It wasn't.
Well, I think maybe we should open the up to the floor up to questions from the audience. There are people with microphones.
Yeah. Oh, and also, for the rest of this, I have some soundtracks and some posters I made specific to this movie, not really liking the official soundtrack or the poster. So if I can get those out here, I'm going to ask a trivia question or something, and if you get the answer, you can pick or something. Speaking of, I talked about Norman Lloyd. Name Norman Lloyd's Hitchcock film. You got it. Poster or soundtrack? Yeah, posters are pretty cool. Here. We did this poster to seem like a 30s poster, kind of like some Paul Muni
I don't know how I'll
movie
get it
or
over to
something.
him. I got to walk.
Okay. So what was the question?
So have we got a question asker yet? Microphone?
here.
Right there? Okay.
Hi, it's the first time I've seen this film, and I'm completely blown away. I think it's one of the best films about life in theater. Actually, seeing it, it reminded me a lot, in many ways, of Shakespeare in Love, different periods, different styles, but it's about the life in the theater. A lot of similarities, kind of hilarious. And so, other than that, my question is, I'd like to ask you about Zac Efron, because there are a lot of British actors in this film, but you could see Zac Efron is a very talented actor, and he's able to hold a certain presence on the screen, despite all of the talent around him. And I noticed that he's a very physical actor, very dexterous, very agile, and you could see that. Did he add those elements in the film where he's using some of his physicality, or is it something that you consciously knew he could bring?
That's I love that observation, because that's exactly what I tell people about Zach. You know, not only does he have that star leading man quality, but his physicality. I mean, he's a dancer. He's kind of a throwback. He's a song and dance man, and so I didn't have to tell him who Fred Astaire was. Like who his idols at that moment are. That little dance move. He does that little Astaire number on the steps outside. That was just him. He has that. He's very smooth, and think about it. That's such a hard part to play. That guy can kind of disappear. He's like the guy. The movie's really about this guy seen through this guy's eyes. If you don't watch it, you'll forget what this guy even looks like. And in your mind, we've all seen so many movies like that. And remember that movie, My Favorite Year, where Peter O'Toole plays? That's a great movie, by the way. I love that movie. But I was thinking, it's so much about him. You almost forget the lead guy a little bit. But I wanted Zach to be, he kind of creates his own fate. He's not a passive guy. He does everything to drive the story. Yeah, I really felt, I had never seen the High School Musical movies, but I went and met with him because I want to meet some young actors who maybe could pull this off, because I'd already cast Christian. And I think we had financing at that point. It was just about, they were going to make the movie with us. But I met him, and he just had something. I was just that star charisma is real. Some people have it. Most of us don't. That's just the facts. And he just, the camera loves him, and he's just really talented. A lot of people, I think, resisted him, like, what the hell? Like, I got these questions like, what are you doing? And I'm like, let's just see the movie. If you don't think he's good in the movie or appropriate, who else? I don't know. I never thought of anyone else after I met him. And to his credit, he had he's this kid from California flying off to London to do Shakespeare with these, big-time Shakespeare actors, a lot of experience, and he's like the rookie on the team who comes in with no attitude and outworks everybody and gets along with everybody. And not only was he one of the few Americans, but he was just great. He was like a team player. Everybody loved him. So I think he'll have a great, long career. I think he'll be one of those guys of that generation who, hopefully does a lot of different things. And I told him, I said, you could be an action star. That physicality you're talking about. I can see you like diving over the hood of a car. I think he can do a lot of stuff, is what I'm saying.
Do we have another question asker
In
ready?
center.
Oh, I see.
Shall we have a trivia?
One real quick question and then my real question. But you mentioned Arthur Anderson. Was he actually fired? Was there any sort of basis for that? And then second, I just wanted to say that, I really enjoyed the movie, but Efron fell a little bit flat to me in that he seemed so confident. Like, it was perfectly natural that he would walk into this part and be on stage and not sweat it. Was that something you asked him to go for, or is that just something he brought to the part?
I like that he had that little bit of the arrogance of youth, you know, instead of being a total dork. If you read the book, the guy is he's a little less confident. He's actually not an actor. He finds out at the end he's a writer. And he gets fired and thinks, okay, I'm not really cut out for acting. Well, Zach is so cut out for it. I remember calling Robert and saying, Zach I think is great, but yeah, I don't think I can pull that off, that you don't believe he's really meant to be there. So I just kind of reworded all that. But I like that, that he had all that confidence. Because you can tell underneath, he's faking that largely, but there's something about that, I mean, Welles did that. He famously went to Ireland and said he was a big star. As a teenager, walked onto the stage and, at the Gate Theatre in Dublin, and, all bravado. Arthur Anderson, he started an accounting firm no, I'm kidding. No. Yeah, that's fictional. That's fictional. He really he did the run of the play. He was young. Here's what's different between him and the movie and the book. In reality, he was about 14. Robert made him a little older just to kind of where he could have these kind of adult, relations. And he wasn't fired. And to this day, I talked to him on the phone. He really kind of worships, Welles, he holds in really high esteem. And whenever they needed a kid, when Mercury on the Air was doing like Treasure Island or something, they just call up Arthur to come over and do voice. He had a long career in radio. He's still kind of the go-to guy. If they're doing a convention or something about old radio, live radio, all that, Arthur is usually up. He's often quoted and on panels and stuff. And he had a long career doing a lot of voice work. Famously, he was the Lucky Charms leprechaun. Pink hearts, green clovers. That's like a 30-year gig, I think he had. Isn't that
29
funny?
years. I think he was Lucky Charms
isn't that
leprechaun for
funny?
29 years.
Isn't that funny? But, yeah.
To your left.
We've got a question asker with the red microphone.
Yes,
Hello, I just want to say I love the film and your work. And my question is, towards the end of the film, when you actually do the scenes of the actual performance of Julius Caesar, the actors they do such a phenomenal job, and I was just curious what kind of preparation that they did for it. Did they actually do readings of the play, or did they study the parts of their characters for Julius Caesar?
Yeah, well, first off, every actor in the play had Shakespeare experience, which helps a lot. And we rehearsed it, and I think so much so. We didn't really rehearse parts that weren't in the play, but there were a lot of scenes cut from the play. I wasn't really sure how much the film would withstand, how much of the actual play. I mean, you see it in various stages in rehearsals, obviously, but I couldn't totally tell how much the final film needed or wanted. So there's numerous scenes that are there, monologues and additional scenes that never made the final cut. But I knew I wanted to go long because I felt it would be good for the actors just to do them and rehearse them and film them. Even though we didn't have much time, it was important, I thought, to do it all. But yeah, everybody just jumped in. I mean, what can you say? Shakespeare, you just have to jump in and do it, But they were great. I can't say, I was a little intimidated, I guess, doing that, the thought of doing Shakespeare and all that. Thankfully, it was just those pieces. But they were so confident at the end. They were going around, because they all have theater experience. They said, hey, we've got the costumes, we've got the scores, we've got the lighting cues. We could put this up. I'm like, yeah. It got, for a moment there, it was like, yeah, let's do it when the film opens. Play for like 2 weeks in New York at some little theater. I was like, yeah. And then it just, I don't know.
In the center here?
We got someone in the center.
A word that comes to my mind with this whole film is audacity. Orson Welles clearly had a tremendous amount of audaciousness. The Zac Efron character also. But I thought it's rather audacious that you picked a man who is now 38, I guess he was 36 when the movie was done, to play a man who was 22. And maybe Orson Welles never really was 22. But curious about that one.
That was my theory, yeah. It was like, yeah, Christian's older. I think he was about 34. But it doesn't, if you look at pictures of Welles from this period, Welles never looked young. I mean, seriously, okay, this is November, in May of 38, not even 6 months later, he's on the cover of Time magazine, as he predicts. And we will be on the cover, but he was on the cover of Time magazine. And looking about 90, he was playing an old guy in their next production. He smoked a pipe, he grew facial hair the second he could, smoked pipes, did everything to make himself look older. So you'd be hard pressed to find a picture of Orson ever looking too youthful. Because, so I thought, well, that's okay. Christian looking as youthful as he could. Christian had to lose weight, though. As he jokes, if he were here, he would be saying, oh, I'm the only actor ever had to lose weight to play Orson Welles. But he did. The young Orson, Christian, those pub-crawling Brits, with their pints. He was on he said on his treadmill or at some gym, he started working out months, because I met him in the summer, and we weren't shooting till early the next year. So he had 6 months to work out, and he did. I would get little emails from him. He was working his way down to Welles' weight. It's like, I'm at Lady from Shanghai. I'm down to, he's working backwards through his career it was funny. It was funny. And he said he had a picture of Zach, like from some photo spread with his, he's like, he had it there. He was like, trying to, motivating him. Oh, I'll ask a
From the
trivia
balcony?
question. I'll ask a trivia question. I only do this because I use this in talking to the actor. One actor from this performance, of all the actors in this play, won an Academy Award in their career. Who's going to raise a hand and say it? Okay. The only guy who isn't an actor, yeah. I tell Eddie Marsan that. He's the put-upon producer. I'm like, hey, no matter how much shit they give you, you're the only one who ever wins an Actor. So,
Chuck.
Soundtrack or poster?
Let's see if I can.
Obviously,
we can reach across
not that
the
winning
pit.
an Academy Award means that much for a,
In the meantime, I think we have a.
The fact that Welles.
Okay, I'll
Okay. The fact that Welles didn't win one for his performance as Charles Foster Kane is crazy. But
Yeah. I think we have a question in the balcony with the yellow mic.
I just wanted to know whether you have another film, either you're working on it or in your head, and will Zach be in it?
we have a Zach fan, yes. To answer the question, yes, I have another film I've just completed. Just finished the sound mix and the DI finished everything just like last week. So I think that'll be out in the fall. It's called Bernie, with low-budget black comedy with Jack Black comedy, and with Shirley MacLaine and Matthew McConaughey. Now there's a pairing of actors, isn't it?
I like
A
that.
true story from my hood of East Texas, And then I have a lot of films in my head and scripts even, but hopefully get them made. And what was the other? Yes, and I do have a film I hope Zach can be in when the time works out. Kind of a college movie, but who knows?
Do we have another question ready from the? Yes, over there.
Hi, thank you so much. This was the second time I'd seen it, and boy, is everything better on this screen.
Yeah, this was great seeing it with you guys in such a big, this is kind of the right place to see this movie, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we had the good luck to see Christian McKay in London in that one-act play, and it was a tiny theater in the back of a pub called the King's Head. You sat on benches, and you really could get the spit from him on you. But I wanted to ask about something, and it may be an aspect you didn't have anything to do about and was purely costuming, but I found it distracting both the times I saw the film. There were so many new plaid jackets, and it seemed like his character wouldn't have been able to afford so many jackets. Was there any significance to that choice?
Zach's character? Well, in the book, he's really, it's the Depression, right? But he's real middle class. His dad has a Union Tire. He's kind of middle class Jersey kid, whatever that, I don't know if that means they can afford more plaid jackets. But yeah, we OD'd on the plaid jackets. We painted ourselves in a corner. I hate to even talk about this, and I'll gladly blame my costume designer. But, it's a continuity thing, and you shoot out of order. Oh, in the Isle of Man, she was in that, and now we're outside the thing, and then we're on the set, and then we're in the studio. And it's like, oh, they both have plaid jackets on. That wasn't supposed to happen. You promised me that wouldn't happen, but, here they are. So anyway, sorry. I could go in digitally and make it a different thing, but we didn't have a budget for that.
Right here to your left.
To the left.
Since you said it took 37 days to shoot, I'm guessing that you're the kind of director who carefully plans every shot. There's no improvising, no making it up as you go along.
That's pretty accurate. Unfortunately, I wish I had more time to discover things. But no, yeah, it has to be planned out. Particularly all the stuff in the theater, just for the camera. We built that set, we built the stage. I like little models, and then actors, and then plan all the camera moves. So you can sit there with your DP and say, okay, and then let's boom up and work all that stuff out. But like a more dramatic scene, if it's just a few actors in a room, I don't get too obsessed with like storyboards or anything. You can kind of feel your way through that. But anything elaborate where you're talking a crane or dollies or on 36-day schedule, yeah, you really can't just show up and spend the first half of the day figuring out what you're doing. You have to have it pretty well. But prep that's free. That's just your own time. I don't know why people don't always do that. You should do that in everything. It's fun too. Is that your only question? Okay, thanks.
Do we have another question ready?
Yeah. Balcony, stage left.
I see.
Hi, I really like the movie and the Sonia Jones character, and I wanted to ask more about that because it shows, you talked about her being really ambitious, but she's not an actress. So why is she going through this casting couch thing if she's not an actress? And did she end up working for O. Selznick and changing her name, or what did she end up doing after this?
Well, that's hard to answer because she's really fictional. She's the one she's kind of, in Robert's mind, who wrote the novel, he had seen a picture of a woman in a magazine who had just graduated from like Vassar or Brown or somewhere, and he just kind of imagined her. So she's completely fictional, so I can't really answer what she did. But we speculated about that. What happens to that, But it wasn't really a casting couch. That was just, her and Orson's, relationship. So, I don't know.
In the back, under the balcony?
In the back, under the balcony.
Hi, I'm just wondering, do I recall having read or heard around the time that this was released that there were only a couple of performances in that theater, and I don't remember, was it canceled immediately after those couple of performances?
What, in 37, this play?
Yes.
Oh, no. They were a repertory theater. It played for a couple months and then toured. It was a big hit. You might be thinking of Cradle Will Rock, which was the next year a controversial play that they shut down the theater. It was the federal theater stuff, whatever.
Do we have, yes, we have
Excuse
another.
me, federal, that was a year earlier, excuse me, earlier.
Hello, I'm a choreographer myself, so I love theater, lights and everything. I wanted to, first, congratulations for the contrast in the red wall and all the men in black. And also I wanted to ask you about the spitting, do you say? It was accidentally, you made it on purpose, and by the way, soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, the spitting. Well, if you're photographing rain or water and mist, anything, you have to backlight it, right? Mm-hmm. And so Christian's up in that pulpit thing, and I was looking at the monitor. I said, "Wow, he's really." I said, "I kind of like that." It references earlier when it says, you're not getting paid anything, just the honor of being sprayed by Orson's spit. I go, well, I mean, we've all, if you sit on the front row in theater, and you're gonna, it happens. So I thought, oh, that's real. So I liked it, even though people kind of go, ooh. But it's like I've been there in the theater and seen them spitting. It just kind of, I don't know, seems very real. You don't see that on film. That doesn't exist in the film world. That's a mistake. You'd never see that.
Balcony, center.
You talked about the difficulty of getting financing. Is there a story about the Isle of Man participation? Because that gave you that great location. Did that come after the financial participation, or how'd that happen?
Well, it worked hand in hand. They had a fund up there, and they had been like this tax haven. Interesting place. Has anyone here ever been to the Isle of Man? You have? Soundtrack or poster? No, kidding. You what's that? Okay. Oh, really? Okay. You're the one he was ragging on about being such a poor pool player? That's funny. We did that in looping. So, anyway, what was the question? The Isle of Man film.
Isle of Man story.
Yes. So they had this film fund, and you had to shoot at least half the film in the Isle of Man. And it's this beautiful place. I mean, just rolling hills. It's very old. They have the oldest standing government. They've had the same government for like over 1,000 years. One of my producers there has a ranch. I was like, oh, I know people in Texas who've had ranches since like the 1870s. He goes, well, I think I have you beat there, mate. My family, from like 1280, we have 3 Viking ships buried on our property. It's like that old. And beautiful, beautiful. So people go there and film kind of for the scenery and the ocean. And it used to be a big tourist place. A lot of Brits from Liverpool and Manchester would take the ferry over and vacation there before plane travel got cheaper, I think in the 70s. Actually, Christian Mackay, his parents honeymooned there, and he said he was conceived on the Isle of Man. He liked telling the Isle of Man people, I was conceived here, so. But it was a really cool place. But they had this film fund, and since we filmed half in that theater, the rest we did in various London locations, and we built 41st Street, like on this little muddy, small stretch of road behind Pinewood Studios. So it just worked out financially. I mean, it was still pretty low budget for what we were doing. But, that's just kind of how you do it nowadays. It's an international world. The funding, sometimes it works out. So I feel really grateful to have gotten the film made. It was kind of a risky project, I guess.
Do we have another?
Over to the right.
Over to the right.
Let me ask another trivia. Who can name, just show of hands, don't just blurt it out, name 2 unrealized Welles projects from his, like in his long career after. Does anyone know 2?
Heart of Darkness and What Became Dead Calm.
No, unrealized. I meant later career. Hearts of Dawn, that's interesting. That's the first one. That's what he did before King. Does that qualify? Should we give him?
I think so.
I believe that, as we're the 2 judges, I believe that qualifies.
Yeah.
Now the question is a film that is shot and not edited, does that qualify as unrealized?
That's what I was thinking.
It's not realized.
Because he has all these, my fault, unfinished film.
You know
Keyword.
what, that I believe then we must judge that this gentleman is correct, because The Deep was not finished. Sound recording was never done.
And then Hearts of Dawn. Yeah. And then, okay, soundtrack or poster? Soundtrack. Good, soundtrack. This is a wonderful soundtrack, by the way.
Did you make that by hand?
Yeah. Yeah, I did these by hand. Here you go. Catch. Well, because, they did this label came aboard in London, and just soundtracks are just so terrible nowadays. They used about half the songs, and, no one will do a double soundtrack, and I don't think they even put it in stores, so what's the point of even doing soundtracks anymore? So I made some of my own and put every song, because I love this music from this period. I've always, been a big fan of this era, and, and beyond. This was a little earlier even than some of the music I was familiar with. So I work with some great musicians over there, Jules Holland and some kind of famous British musicians.
So we've got a question over there.
Yeah, I'm definitely longtime fan, first-time questionnaire, and unfortunately I got here like towards the last 15 minutes of the film, so.
You didn't miss it.
I just want to say beautiful, absolutely wonderful, like 15-minute, just all around gorgeous. But, and I had a question about the long take technique, which I just think you do an amazing job with, but now it's changed, and I want to ask you, when you're developing the film in your head, do you tend to make soundtracks often that don't make the final cut? Because I find that when I'm trying to put something together, I end up with like, a music video because it's so like directed by the music, I kind of visualize it to a soundtrack, and I'm just curious if that's...
Depends on the project. Like this film, for sure, it's so specific to a time, place, and if you think, you get into the period, if you think 1937, there was music, a really incredible, and this is sort of lost in our culture, there was music everywhere. Everyone played music. Sheet music was everywhere. Almost everyone played an instrument. Before TV and everything of our modern culture, what did families do? They sat around and sang and danced and played. So it was very musical. And then with amplification, and you had music coming out of storefronts, and so it was a really noisy musical radio. So I kind of wanted it to feel like there was music everywhere. So that informed, I just knew it'd be a big soundtrack movie, and then so music sort of informed everything. I like to put together a bunch of music. I gave all the actors probably 5 times this much music, and from the period, and said, just listen to all this. And they do it to varying degrees, but you tell them like what their tastes might be, what they like, what they think is cool, or So that's the fun part. Some movies not so much. It's not as integral, but it's a lot more fun when it is. It seems to be that much more real, for everyone.
I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, no, we've gotta ask more questions.
Over on that side.
First of all, I really enjoyed the movie as well, and I think that although it's a period piece, it really looks very contemporary and feels very contemporary. It's a 4-part question. I was wondering how many cameras you used, if I'm allowed, what kind of camera you used. If you can speak a little bit about the research you had to do and about your process as a filmmaker. Thanks.
Research process.
No dinner for you.
Well, we shot on film. This is like, there was talk, we could shoot this HD, or like, no way, 1937? You're going to shoot this like, so 35 millimeter. Didn't shoot in CinemaScope, used like movie cam cameras. What else? Oh,
How many
the
cameras?
most 2. We couldn't really afford. I'm never a 3-camera guy, but 2 when you can. It's great if you can choreograph for 2 cameras. But there's a lot of scenes like a long Steadicam shot. There's just no place for a second camera. So, but you always have it on the truck. So that's, if you can afford that, that's helpful, I think. But what else?
Research.
My process. Research, like for visually? Yeah. Well, the usual, you look at photos, but photos can be deceiving because most of them are black and white, and you realize it's such a colorful period. I've done another film set in the teens and 20s, and your reference is black and white photos, but then you realize you have to do more research to really get historically accurate and find out what colors, what people were wearing, what colors they were, and New York was a pretty, you work with your costume designer and discuss palettes and all that. That's fun though. But that's when you're feeling like the magic of cinema, when you're recreating a moment in time like that and trying to be historically accurate. That's really, I've done a lot of contemporary films where that's not the focus of the movie, but when you're doing a period film, it feels like there's this extra layer, and you feel like, especially a period film, because if you look here and here, it can be 1937, but if you look there, it's 2009, so it's a puzzle. You feel like you're putting a really elaborate puzzle together, but it's fun, but a little more taxing, but.
And then I think process was the 4th part.
Yeah, 4th process. Yeah, we
That
used
may
a
take a
lab
while.
that processed the film. No, I don't know. Who answered that? Who had that question earlier about who just threw out that they wanted a poster? Who had a question earlier? I don't know. So I don't know. A process about what? There's a process? You wake up in the morning. I don't know. That's such a big question, process. With what? Actors? I don't know. That's a too all-encompassing question. I don't know. It'd have to be more specific. Process.
Would it
Although I'm very process-oriented. I like the process. Just like in sports, you have to be process-oriented, not results-oriented. Process. Emphasize process.
Well,
we love process.
Process, folks. And on that note, I think we have to wrap up.
Another trivia question?
We'll do a final trivia question.
2 more soundtracks and a couple posters.
Oh, really? Okay. John Houseman's final role?
No.
It's his first role.
John Houseman's the final ever role, and then...
I know that.
Come on, raise your hands if you know it. Yes. Well done.
Poster or soundtrack. But what was his
Naked Gun was the final.
Yeah,
Naked
Gun.
Gun.
Let's not go out on that one. What was his last great performance? Naked Gun? Okay.
Naked Gun
No,
is the answer again.
Oh, he's great in it. Uncredited.
He's a great actor. But Woody Allen's Another Woman. He's fantastic in. He's fantastic in that. He plays Jenna Rowland's father. Here, poster. All right.
Careful.
This little orchestra pit is dangerous.
I don't want you to tumble in there and the bad luck thing.
What's another trivia question?
The Naked Gun was the answer for John Houseman.
What?
He's a driving instructor.
Here's while we're talking about Houseman. Here's one. Who did he shill for? What securities firm? But we own it. Smith Barney. Who said Smith Barney back? Okay. Yeah, very good. That was the real question. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm not going to throw it all the way up there.
Far?
I could wing it up.
Someone may have to claim it.
Yeah, it is kind of. Yeah, you want a soundtrack too? Yeah, that was kind of funny to be with Houseman and Welles, to know they spent their later careers doing like these commercials and. Welles famously, but he had that great voice.
And they famously fell out as well, and they never...
It's one of the tragedies of the film history, I feel, is that Welles really needed Houseman.
Yeah.
He really, I wish somehow or another that relationship could have survived. You see all these great films in the 50s that Houseman produced. Every time I see his name on a credit, and I go, damn it, why isn't he producing one Orson Welles movie every year through the 40s and 50s? Wouldn't that have been a different world we live in? But by the time Kane was even shooting, it was pretty much over. And he knew, Houseman just looked at the dailies and knew, yes, of course, this guy's going to be the greatest filmmaker ever. What else could he be? But it was just, that was it. They couldn't go on. But, name what Vincent Minnelli film about making film did Houseman produce? Yes. Soundtrack. Wait. You
No, I think we're down to one soundtrack.
You don't count.
Yeah, you
gave away the answer too. You're hogging. This doesn't want to show how smart you are. It was like, no. Okay. What's another?
Orson Welles' last role. Are you asking Richard?
Oh, here's one. What was the last film? Joseph Cotten, unlike Houseman and others, he liked Welles. They were friends for life. But he worked around him. Anytime, to me, this movie was about how you work with that kind of genius. You have to find your little place within their world. And then if you can... Yeah, Cotten, the Mercury. Yeah, he took them all to Hollywood. Welles was actually very generous. He gets this reputation, but he took all of them to Hollywood with him. He gave them careers. He paid their rent. He really was very, very generous, I feel, to all of them.
Well, I'm afraid that our time limit is up. We have to wrap up. But
all right, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much
really
for being here.
Yeah. So she has a.